Gildan Media presents Your Coach in a Box. Affordable, mind-enriching programs. Gildan Media presents an unabridged recording of No is a Four-Letter Word, How I Failed Spelling but Succeeded in Life. Written and read by Jericho.
Introduction. Let's get it started in here. No, no, no. Don't say you can't when you can. Kiss. No, no, no. A prerequisite of being a heavy metal kid in the 1980s was watching music videos, and one of the first bands that effectively utilized this new medium to the highest degree was Twisted Sister. TS filmed many movie intros to their videos that set the stage for the song, and the best example of this was the prelude for their 1984 monster hit, We're Not Gonna Take It. The video opened with a kid playing air guitar in his room, a ritual that I was also guilty of at the time. Until the kid's militant dad, I recognized him instantly as Niedermeyer from Animal House, bursts into the room and berates him for wasting his time and hoping that his rock and roll dreams come true. Towering over his son, he gives him the bollocking of his young life and then demands to know the answer to one simple question: what do you want to do with your life? The kid looks sheepishly up at his parental torture and barks back in Dee Snider's voice these three magic words: I want to rock. Then he strums a majestic power chord on his axe and blows his dad out of the second-story window as the song's iconic drum intro kicks in. While I never caused my dad great bodily harm by torpedoing him out of a second-floor window, I do remember having a similar answer when he asked me what I wanted to do with my life. However, in my case, the answer was a little more detailed. Yes, I wanted to rock, but I also wanted to wrestle. You see, I decided when I was 12 years old that I loved both of these equally and therefore was going to succeed at both. I never thought about what the odds were in making it in even one of these vocations, never mind the two of them, but I also didn't care. All I knew was that I wanted to rock and wrestle and wasn't interested in much else. Well, here we are 35 years later in 2017, and lo and behold, good golly, Miss Molly, here I am living both my dreams at the highest of levels. Now, even though my success in wrestling is obviously bigger than my success with Fozzy, my band has done a damn good job fighting our way into the big leagues as well. We aren't Kiss or Metallica, but we've toured with both and held our own, so I'd say that's pretty freaking good, wouldn't you agree? If you do, your million-dollar question might be, how did you achieve both of your dreams? Well, for a long time, I didn't really have a specific answer. I wanted to be a rocker and a wrestler, so I did it. But when the idea of this book was pitched to me by my marvelous literary agent, Mark Gerald, I realized there was a whole lot more to the story of how I got to where I am today than I originally thought. After much deliberation, I was able to distill the secret of my success, and I ain't talking about Michael J. Fox, into 20 simple principles, or rules, if you will, that can help you achieve your dreams too. Whether you're looking to get a promotion, land a certain gig, meet the girl or guy of your dreams, or become the first ever undisputed world champion, actually, scratch that one, I beat you to it, I think this book will help you. One of the first things I came up with was the title. It popped in my head early on into the process because the lesson contained within those 6 words is fundamental to everything I've achieved. The secret is simple, because no really is a 4-letter word. These 2 runes combined form the most crippling weapon in the English language, an idiom so evil that it has the power to derail even the most dedicated of people and crush their dreams in a split second. It's a word even more repugnant than the most abrasive of profanities, and my whole life I've wanted nothing to do with it. And let me clarify, this isn't about not taking no for an answer from the girl you want to invite to the sock hop or take out for dinner at El Pollo Loco. I've accepted those type of no's more times than you like to admit. What I'm talking about is not accepting no for an answer when it comes to what you want out of life and out of your career. That's the kind of no I've never bowed down to, and that's where the idea to write this tome came from. This book started as a list of 20 lessons I've learned that have guided me through my life and my career. Some have more importance than others, depending on the moral, and others didn't make the final cut because they just weren't excited enough to write about. You'll have to wait for Volume 2 to read the Bob Backlund principle, save your money. Some of the axioms in this Vade Mecum were learned from my parents, others came from various mentors along the way, and others were taught the hardest way of all, by trying, failing, learning, and doing better the next time. My list of rules comes from different sources for sure, but all of them combined form a cohesive philosophy. I know these dictums have helped me immensely in my life, and I'm certain they can help you as well. Now, it's not like you're going to be reading the Dead Sea Scrolls or the Necronomicon, But if a few of these chapters influence your life in a positive way and help you become a happier person, then both of us will have gained something. This is my motivational book. There are many motivational books like it, but this one is mine. My motivational book is my best friend. It is my life. I must master it as I master my life. Without me, my motivational book is useless, and without my motivational book, I am useless. You dig? All right, enough of my yakking. It's time to turn the page, and I ain't talking about Bob Seger, and get started. Let's boogie. Chapter 1, The Mike Damone Principle. Wherever you are, that's the place to be. The chance you got comes never twice. Do your best and do it right. Halloween, the chance. Mike Damone is one of the coolest characters in cinematic history, and if you don't agree, well, then you don't know Jack. Or should I say, Mike. What I'm saying is if you haven't seen Fast Times at Ridgemont High, I highly recommend that you check it out, as the story and characters are flawless. For those of you cool cats who have seen it, you might be more familiar with Sean Penn's Jeff Spicoli, awesome, totally awesome, or Judge Reinhold's Brad Hamilton, I hope you had a hell of a piss, Arnold. But the quote I always identified with the most was by Robert Romanus' Mike Damone. Damone was a Fonz-esque ne'er-do-well who would just as easily swindle you for overpriced scalped Earth, Wind, and Fire tickets as he would give you sage-like life advice. He walked the face of them all, doling out nuggets of straight fire to his nerdy protege Mark Ratner on a number of subjects, especially on how to pick up girls. When Rat is having problems figuring out a way to break the ice with his high school crush Stacy, who Damone ends up banging in a pool cabana, Mike gives him a bunch of tips on how to make it happen. Having attitude and confidence, ordering for the lady in the restaurant, and making out to Led Zeppelin 4 are all on this magic list, but it's his next tip that stood out the most to me, because it applies to a whole lot more than just picking up Stacey Hamilton. Wherever you are, that's the place to be, Mike proclaims as he majestically surveys his surroundings, spreading out his arms regally with a giant grin on his face. Isn't this great? He continues joyously. It's a brilliant piece of advice that can be used in all situations, because what Damone is saying is that no matter what you're doing or where you are, you need to act like it's the best place on earth and make the best of what you're given. Now, for example, if you take Damone's words and apply them to an assignment given to you by your boss, no matter how big or small, imagine how much more fire you will have to get it done. In my lines of work, it can be frustrating to only have a few minutes on Raw or a short set at a rock festival to show the crowd what I've got. But much like a fourth-line player on a great hockey team, if you perform that smaller role well, your team will win, and you'll probably get a bigger role next time. When I last saw you, constant reader, at the end of my third magnum opus, the best in the world at what I have no idea, I had just been announced in the 2013 Royal Rumble as a surprise entrant. It was one of my favorite WWE moments, as it was a legit surprise for the sold-out crowd in Phoenix, and they went totally ballistic when I walked onto the stage. That Rumble appearance was going to be the beginning of a multi-month storyline that would lead to me working against Ryback at WrestleMania 29. While that might not seem like such a big deal now, in 2013 it would have been a big match. At the time, Ryback's star had risen to where I feel if he had won the world title, the WWE Universe would have bought into it big time. He was so over that I even imagined a scenario where he would win the WWE Championship from CM Punk in October and go on to face The Undertaker in April at WrestleMania 29. Facing Taker at the biggest show of the year was a huge honor. The Holy Grail even, and I felt with his push and current momentum that the big guy was explosive and powerful enough to be a formidable Mania dance partner for the dead man. For whatever reason, things didn't go that way. Ryback lost to Punk and didn't win the World Championship, but he was still over in a big way, and I thought a great way to build him back up again would be to work with me. When I pitched the story to the creative team for me to come back for a 6-month run through Mania ending at SummerSlam, my two tentpole ideas were a surprise return at the Rumble and a Mania match with Ryback. After I returned, I worked the first few months against random opponents, including an Elimination Chamber match that was so uneventful I had to Google it to remember who else was in it. I figured that my angle with Ryback would begin shortly after, as the road to WrestleMania always started the day after the Chamber pay-per-view. But it didn't, and Ryback seemed to be moving towards a storyline with Mark Henry. That confused me because even though my match had already been approved by my boss Vince McMahon, I wasn't hearing anything about it from anybody. Finally, I called head writer Dave Kapoor to find out what was going down. It turned out my suspicion was correct. Ryback is going to work with Mark Henry at Mania, Dave said, but don't worry, Vince has something else planned for you and he wants to tell you about it himself. I appreciated his candor and wondered what Vince had up his sleeve. 4 years earlier, he had worked out a deal with Mickey Rourke, who was riding a massive career resurgence from his Oscar-nominated role in The Wrestler, to have a match with me at WrestleMania 25. And even though that match never happened, I still ended up in a pretty good spot working against 3 WWE Hall of Famers in Roddy Piper, Ricky Steamboat, and Jimmy Snuka, and getting knocked out by Rourke at the end. I was excited and wondered what feature role the boss had in mind for me this time around. I waited a few weeks for him to give me the heads up, but he never did. I prodded Kapoor to give me a clue, but he insisted that he didn't know anything. I promised myself I wouldn't give in and ask Vince what he had in mind, giving him the upper hand. But with all the other Mania programs already full steam ahead, I started wondering if I was even going to be on the show at all. With just over a month until the big night, all of the top names in the company had already been paired off, along with most of the mid-card guys, except a new character with these goofy vignettes on Raw, but there was no way I'd be working with him. I assumed Vince had lined up another outside celebrity, but I'd been racking my brain and absolutely had no idea who it might be. I couldn't take it anymore, so I shot Vince a text and said, I hear you've got a secret plan for me at Mania. Liberace in a tuxedo match? Cy Sperling in a hair versus hair? When are you planning on filling me in? Vince texted me back a few minutes later and said something along the lines of, you think you're working a match at Mania? I thought I'd just have you set up the ring. Uh-oh. The fact that Vince was dodging my question behind the veil of a bad joke wasn't a good sign, and I told him so. 30 minutes later, my phone rang, and I saw VKM on the screen. When I answered, Vince was being over-the-top charming, littering his speech with more bad jokes and fake laughs. I felt like he was trying to butter me up before telling me something I wouldn't like. Yowza, was I right? Well, I know we talked about you and Ryback, but I want to go in a different direction. I have another idea for you. I waited in silence for him to continue. The pause was intentionally uncomfortable, and Vince continued in a serious tone. We have this new kid called Fandango. What? Fandango was the character I'd thought about earlier, whose goofy Dancing with the Stars theme gimmick had been promoted for weeks on TV with a bunch of campy vignettes. He's a good worker, and I really believe in this gimmick. I'd like to have him debut at WrestleMania, and I can't think of a bigger and better opponent for him than Chris Jericho. Vince proclaimed boisterously, like a jacked-up P.T. Barnum, using his famed McJedi mind tricks to try to convince me that this was an opportunity of a lifetime. I lost all sense of decorum and lashed out way too harshly at my billionaire boss. Are you kidding me? You're going to put me in the ring with Fandango at WrestleMania? You agreed to have me work with Ryback, and now you're pairing me with a guy who hasn't even been on TV yet? The gimmick is going to be big, and I need to debut him with a bang, Chris. Get in there with him, take 90% of the match, and go straight to the finish. It didn't surprise me that Vince thought the character was going to be big because I knew exactly where he came up with the idea. A few years prior, when I was on DWTS, Vince called to tell me how proud he was that I was doing the show. We were talking about how intense the rehearsals and training were, and I mentioned how in shape the male dancers were. Oh, there's no doubt about that, he said, but they look ridiculous dancing and prancing across the floor. How can you ever take them seriously? At that moment, I knew it wouldn't be long before there was a character based on a male ballroom dancer, and here he was. This reminded me of when I predicted a heel-wearing scarf character after Vince mocked me for consistently wearing one. Scarves are cool, and if they're good enough for Keith Richards, they're good enough for me. Sure enough, a few weeks later, Alberto Del Rio was walking to the ring wearing one of his own. I have since reclaimed the scarf heat for my own act. But despite Vince's suggestion of squashing Fandango, I still wasn't happy about the idea and trying to give him some other options. What if I challenged Wade Barrett for the Intercontinental Championship instead? We could come up with a story where I'm chasing my self-record-breaking 10th IC title by trying to beat my former protege. I'd been Barrett's mentor on the inaugural season of the original NXT show, which was based around 8 rookies being advised by their individual pros. And Wade was my rookie, so the angle was a no-brainer. Vince didn't agree. Oh, come on, nobody remembers that. Besides, this Fandango character is a real heat magnet, and the kid has a ton of personality. This is the way to go. Vince was right in the fact that Johnny Curtis, who was playing Fandango, was charismatic and a good worker. I just didn't think debuting him at Mania against me was best for my business. But alas, I knew the battle had been lost. It doesn't matter what I say at this point, does it, Vince? This is the way you want it, and nothing I say is going to change your mind, is it? Nope, this is what I want. Whatever, I spit out and hung up on him. I was pissed off and felt double-crossed by Vince. When I called Kapoor and told him that my Mania opponent was going to be Fandango, even he couldn't hide his surprise. Wow was his one-word answer that said more than 1,000 words could have. I was caught somewhere in time, mad as hell, and thought about simply refusing to do the match. Vince had no right to treat me this way, and broken promises didn't sit well with me, especially when that meant I was going to be saddled in a prelim match at the biggest show of the year. What should I do? Where should I turn? Who could give me the advice I needed to make the right decision? There was only one man wise enough for that: The Undertaker. I called and told him of my conundrum. He listened to my concerns and then calmly gave his analysis. Listen, man, I know how you're feeling right now, but let's be honest. Either you do the match or you quit, and you'd be stupid to quit because this really isn't that bad. I know everybody talks about my WrestleMania winning streak, which at the time was 20-0, and over the last few years, those matches have been pretty damn good, but they weren't always that way. Vince put me in there with a lot of dudes who weren't exactly easy to work with. He mentioned no names, but guys like Giant Gonzalez, King Kong Bundy, and a way past his prime Jimmy Snuka crossed my mind. But I did the best I could with what I was given because it was my job. It was Vince's call, and I did what he wanted. So take this opportunity Vince has given you, do your best, and make it good. If you do that, he will take care of you. Honestly, Chris, this is part of your job, so go do it. Everything he said was right, and deep down inside, I knew it. I just needed to hear it from him, and once I did, it was all systems go. And I ain't talking about the Vinnie Vincent invasion, with no looking back. This was my mission, and I was going to accept it and do everything I could to get both Fandango and the Angle over as much as possible in the short amount of time I had. My first thought was I needed to get the fans familiar with the Fandango character as quickly as I could, and the best way to do that was to mess with his name so they would recognize it. So in our first meeting, I decided to mispronounce it in as many ways as I could think of. When he made his debut appearance on Raw by interrupting me in the middle of a backstage promo, I asked him his name, and he replied, Fandango. I stared at him in silence until he said it again, and then I tried to repeat it. Fandumbo. He corrected me and said his name again. Fandango. Fandung hole. He had a conniption fit and repeated his moniker for a third time. I proceeded to beat the dead dancing horse by throwing out a litany of butchered attempts to get it right. Fanjango, Fandangle, Fan Dodge Durango, Fan Sweet Mango, Fan Wantango, Fandingo ate my baby-o, that was my personal favorite, and finally, Fan B-I-N-G-O was his name-o. Instantly, we established his name and the fact that I couldn't or refused to pronounce it correctly. It gave me and the fans something to sink our teeth into right off the bat, which the Angle desperately needed. The next step was to get him over as a serious threat. With a gimmick that campy, it would be easy to dismiss him as a joke, and I didn't want that happening on my watch. Fandango was a good worker with a great top rope leg drop for a finish, so I worked on getting that over. It was an impressive-looking move, and I had him nail me with it every time he attacked me for the next few weeks. Even when the plan was for me to get one up on him, I changed it to him beating me up and hitting me with the leg drop again. Everybody knew me and my moves, but nobody had seen what this dancing fool could do, and we had to establish that he was dangerous. Over the next few weeks, it was basically a rotating pattern of Fandango beating me down, always culminating with a top rope leg drop, combined with me mispronouncing his name. It wasn't much, but it was all we had, and in the end, it did the trick, because the time we got to Mania, there was interest in the match. Not huge, but more than I was expecting due to a combination of my strategy, Fandango's kitschy character, and his catchy I Dream of Jeannie-style entrance music. Some fans were even starting to dance along with his theme song, moving their arms up and down in time with the game show theme jam while humming along with the melody. So I took solace in the fact that some fans were looking forward to the match, and even though others thought it was a waste of time, well, it didn't matter anyway because I was winning. Or was I? A few days before Mania, producer Dean Malenko called to tell me, much to my shock, that the finish was Fandango going over clean, and I went berserk. I called Vince and started screaming that I was sick of this double-crossing bullshit. It was bad enough that he had changed my Mania match to Fandango, but now he was changing the finish too? Vince seemed genuinely surprised at that last comment. I never changed the finish, he replied calmly. Are you kidding me? Yes, you did, I bellowed. You told me to take 90% of the match and go straight to the finish. That's what I said. Then I realized he was right. That was exactly what he said. I thought back to our initial phone conversation when he explained how he wanted the match. A verdict that I had just repeated to him verbatim. Vince said that he wanted me to take 90% of the match, a.k.a. eat Fandango up and get most of the offense, and then go straight to the finish. While he never said outright that he wanted Fandango to go over, all I had to do was use the common sense I'd learned after 23 years in the business to figure out that if Vince was high enough on Fandango to book him in his first match with me at WrestleMania, there was no way he'd have him lose. I had stuck my patent leather boot in my mouth by assuming I was going to go over, and we all know what happens when you assume. It makes an ass out of Yumi. Now, I'm not sure who the hell this Yumi is, but you get the point. I told Vince that nobody in the audience would buy Fandango beating me clean, but that was precisely what he was counting on. That's what I want. I'd be thrilled if 75,000 people started chanting bullshit at the finish. The less they buy it, the better. I really want to piss them off. I was still a little pissed off myself, but now that I knew the finish and understood the reason for it, I hunkered down and strategized on how to make the best of it. I had no interest in taking 90% of the bout because I couldn't think of a more boring scenario than a Chris Jericho squash match at Mania, even with a twist ending, so I put the match together with the idea that Fandango could beat me at any time. That worked great because at that point, nobody in their right mind thought I was going to lose that match, and I used that to my advantage to put together the most exciting contest possible. The match ended up being not bad, not a classic by any means, but a good second match in the show. The finish would have me go for a lion salt, but Dango would put up his knees. However, I would land on my feet and try for the walls, but he would then small package me for the Duke. It didn't go as smoothly as I would have liked, as I overshot him on the moonsault and had to no-sell the fact that I completely missed him, but it was what it was. The most important thing was that after he went over, the audience was shocked. They didn't chant bullshit like Vince had hoped, but they certainly didn't buy it either, and that's the way he wanted it. What they did buy was the entertainment value of the campy Fandango character, especially the next night. Every year, the Raw after WrestleMania is notorious for being infested with hardcore fans from around the world who try to hijack the show by doing whatever they want, regardless of the performers' or writers' intentions. They seem to be more concerned with getting themselves over than sitting back and enjoying the show, and it's become an annual tradition to see what ridiculous shit they may come up with throughout the course of the night. So, at the Raw after WrestleMania 29 at the Izod Center in New Jersey, those wacky hardcore fans made Fandango the most over character in the company. All night long, the crowd sang his theme song Cha-Cha La La, which even made it to number 44 in the UK singles charts, and did the annoying hands up and down dance ad nauseum. When he actually came to the ring, they exploded. If you gauge the reaction on the WWE all-time biggest pop Richter scale, I would say it landed somewhere between Hulk Hogan in 1986 and The Rock in 2002. It still wasn't at hashtag Road Warrior Pop levels, though. Even crazier, when I was leaving the venue after the show, there were literally hundreds of fans in the parking lot singing his song as they were walking to their cars. It was so loud that I called Vince and held the phone out the window so he could hear it. Say what you want about that character, but at that moment on that night, Fandango became a cult hero, and I'm taking some credit for that. Granted, Johnny Curtis had done a great job playing the character and getting himself over, but I laid out the blueprint. What's the lesson here? It all goes back to the Mike Damone principle. I had been given an unenviable task, and even though I was furious about it at first, I eventually set my sights on doing the best job I could with the situation I was put in. I did my damnedest to make the Jericho versus Fandango match the place to be. Now, in the long run, the Fandango gimmick ended up being just a fad, and a few months later, the Dancing Inferno was put on the back burner. But I'm proud of what Johnny and I were able to accomplish together during those few short weeks, and I'm glad to see that at the time of this writing, he's got a good thing going on the WWE main roster, teaming with Tyler Breeze as Breezango. And even though the Fandango angle has become a private joke between Vince and me, when I won the 2014 Slammy for Extreme Moment of the Year, Vince chose Fandango to accept the trophy in my absence. When I got my Mania check, I was surprised to see it was one of the biggest payoffs I've ever received. It was more than I got for headlining WrestleMania 18 against Triple H, and the same as what I made for challenging CM Punk for the World Championship the year before. Undertaker's advice was right. I had made the most of the chance Vince had given me, and he had taken care of me in return, handsomely. The Damone principle applies to rock and roll as well, as I learned when Fozzy was on the Do You Want to Start a War tour and we were asked to play in the widely popular Kiss Cruise, sailing from Miami to Jamaica over the course of 4 days. All that was required from us was to do 3 shows, 1 meet and greet, and I would record a podcast episode of Talk is Jericho with Kiss mega manager, the legendary Doc McGee. We jumped at the chance. Hell, I would have done a dozen shows for free and swabbed the poop deck with poop if they wanted us to. I mean, come on, we would be touring with motherfucking Kiss. We were stoked when we boarded the Norwegian Pearl in Miami like the damn rock stars that we were. We checked in and were given a packet that listed our schedule for the trip, including the set times for our 3 shows. I'm always a stickler for details, so I checked to see when we would be playing, and more importantly, if we would be clashing, aka playing at the same time, with any of the other bands. The first show was free and clear, as we were slated to play as the last band of the night, which was perfect, as everybody was going to be in a partying mood and would be ready to rock. I was right, as the show was jam-packed and the crowd was raucously raucous. The third show was in the middle of the day on the main deck, so I figured we would have a decent crowd, even if it was just rubberneckers having a Mai Tai or hanging out in the sun. Once again, I was right. But it was the second show's set time that made me shiver me timbers. The gig was the next night at the seemingly prime time of 8 p.m., which under normal circumstances would have made me happy. But that particular time slot scared the shit out of me for one reason. We were playing at the same time as Kiss, on the Kiss cruise. Isn't this great? When I asked the cruise director, he wasn't as cute as Julian McCoy, why on God's gave rock and roll to you green earth they would book a band to play opposite Kiss on the Kiss cruise, he explained that the theater they were playing only held 1,500 people and there were almost 3,000 on the ship. So those who weren't able to get in to see Kiss would be ready, willing, and able to rock with Fozzy instead, right? Wrong. What he didn't tell me was that there were big screens scattered throughout the ship showing a live stream of the Kiss concert as they played their classic album Alive in its entirety. Duh. Who in the hell was going to show up to see us play? Maybe not even me, as Alive was one of my favorite albums, and I wasn't sure I wanted to miss that for my own Fozzy show. But instead of caving in under the crushing disappointment and slight embarrassment of playing in front of the 112 people who showed up on the main deck that held about 2,500, we decided to make the best of what we've been given and make our Fozzy gig the place to be on the ship at that time. I didn't care that Kiss was hosting us. We wanted all 112 of those people to have the time of their lives and go back home thinking that even though Kiss were the kings of the mountain, Fozzy would be the next ones to take the oath. We went into that show with the attitude that we wanted to give Kiss a destroyer of their own and blow them out of the water, pun intended. And those few people who chose to spend their night with us were rewarded with a hotter-than-hell rock show for sure. We worked that tiny crowd just as hard as if we were rocking them in Madison Square Garden, which was the mindset of Kiss themselves in their early club days. It ended up being one of my favorite shows we've done, made even more memorable by the fact that it was Halloween night. So there were quite a few rockers in the crowd dressed in costumes, including me wearing Paul Stanley's 1973 Bandit makeup, and another dude dressed up as a toilet. Have you ever seen a commode moshing? It's quite the sight. Thankfully, we weren't the shits as we tried to wipe the floor with Kiss. See what I did there? And when the last song ended, we had gained an additional 112 lifelong Fozzy fans. Evidently, those 112 people wasted no time telling everyone how much fun they had at our show, because when I saw Doc McGee the next day, he told me, I heard you guys had a great show last night. Really? Where'd you hear that? There was hardly anybody there. We're on a cruise ship, Chris. Word gets around pretty quickly. Good point. The bottom main line was that we had made the best of what we were given that night, and the good news traveled fast. Wherever you are, that's the place to be, Damone had said. And on that night, the place to be was at the Fozzy gig on the Kiss Cruise. Isn't this great? Chapter 2, The Jericho Principle. Believe in yourself or nobody else will. I just feel I can be anything that I might ever wish to be, and fantasize just what I want to be, make my wildest dreams come true. Iron Maiden, Wildest Dreams. Rock star or pro wrestler? That was my quandary when I was 14 years old. Both captured my imagination, and even though I didn't have much of an understanding of what being a rock star or a wrestler entailed, I had a feeling, an instinct, that I could be good at both. The problem was they seemed as unattainable as the hottest girl in my high school, Roxanne Falk. I had a huge crush on her, and at first she wouldn't even give me the time of day. But after months of flirting, wooing, and charming, I'm proud to say I ended up making out with her once on the dance floor at a social. Yeah, I know I said once, but it still counts. Swapping spit with Roxanne was a great motivator for me, because it showed that with enough hard work and persistence, I could make even the most seemingly impossible dream come true. So after kind of conquering Falk Mountain, I set my sights on breaking into wrestling and music, but the only question was, how? Now, keep in mind that in 1987, there was no internet where you could learn about wrestling schools or find like-minded musicians to form a band with. Thankfully, I found some in high school. So I was pretty much left to my own devices. Recently, I read Arnold Schwarzenegger's autobiography, and he told the story of how he decided as a young teenager, about the same age as I was at the time, that he was going to be the greatest bodybuilder ever and the biggest movie star in the world. I'm sure when his buddies in the small town of Thal, Austria, heard about his double fantasy, they gave him the same reaction that my buddies in the small town of Winnipeg, Canada gave me. Mocking disbelief. I'm sure if I said I wanted to be an astronaut and a pharmacist, or the premier of Manitoba and a rodeo clown.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?